Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Afzali, and this is You Can Handle the Truth. We are so happy to be back here with you today. We have a great episode for you in store. We're here with our resident Bible nerd. It is Shane Rosenthal. Shane! Hello, and welcome.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
And Shane, the last time he was here, we touched upon Jacob and Jacob's ladder, but this time we're going to go even further. And we're going to talk about how Jacob wrestled with God and how that all ties into Jesus and our scripture here today. And you see the books behind him. He's read every one of them and he remembers them. So that's why he's here. And I've got the pillows. He's got the books. Somehow those books got to get in here too. So thank you, Shane, for being here. We're so happy.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Good. So I don't know even where to begin. We're going to be in the book of Genesis in chapter 32, but if you want to start anywhere else or anything, just...
Yeah, well, let me just give a little bit of a warm-up, and that is the last time when we did focus on Jacob's ladder, that's Genesis 28, and Jacob is, the patriarch of Israel. He's the grandson of Abraham. And he's leaving the land because he just deceived his father and cheated his brother out of his birthright. The name Jacob actually means deceiver and heel catcher, tripper-upper. And he's sort of living up to his namesake. And his father even says, he has deceived you. So that's something the text acknowledges. And as a result of that, his brother wants to kill him. His mom tells him this, so he leaves the land. He's gone for 20 years. And on his way out, we talked about last time, he ends up encountering God at Bethel. God promises to be with him. God says he will bring him back to the land. He's gone for 20 years. He gets married. He has a lot of children. And he's now on his way back into the land. So that's Genesis 32. We're going to focus on an amazing scene as he's returning back to the land. But the main thing on his mind is, what do I do about Esau? He wanted to kill me 20 years ago, and he sends out messages to Esau that he's coming, and the text leading up to what you'll start reading in verse 22 is he gives his brother all kinds of gifts and bribes and camels and donkeys and cows and things because he's afraid of his brother, and he's afraid that his brother will attack him.
Well, he had that name, and it just kind of brings home the point always when I read about Jacob, but really anyone in the Bible, that they are really flawed people.
Right.
And that God works through each of them in such a magnificent and merciful way. And for Jacob to even have the name deceiver, right? For him to be that person, and then for God to redeem him so dramatically in Scripture is just hopeful for someone like me, or maybe someone like you out there in the audience that maybe hasn't done it all perfectly, but there is a good God who loves you and wants to make it right with you. So
there's a fascinating quote from Bono of U2. He wrote this introduction to the Psalms some years ago, decades ago, and he has this line in there that it's always stuck with me. He said, "When I was young, the fact that there are so many scoundrels in the Bible, so many of the Bible's characters are scoundrels and sinful people, used to shock me. But now, as the older I've gotten, it's kind of a source of great comfort."
It is. You know what? What a beautiful... So this is U2, this is the singing group you're talking about.
Right. Bono, the lead singer, had wrote about that.
I mean, that is like totally profound because if we were all perfect, none of us would come to God, right? Because we just think, I'm just never going to be good enough, and none of us are. And that's the truth.
And one of the interesting things is you read a lot of commentators about Jacob, there's a lot of people who read it in this kind of, this is pious information to help me to become a better me, and it's moral lessons. And there are some commentators in some of the books behind me who say, if you read it that way, this story will shock you because this is not a story about be like Jacob. It's not. But there's a greater story here.
Well, And also for our audience to know, and I do want to bring this up, what a lot of people don't know, and Christians reading the Old Testament, is that these are all the ancestors of Jesus. And it's just so miraculous that every one of them has a story.
Right.
And Jesus's entire family line is broken and full of prostitutes and ne'er-do-wells and all kinds of people who don't do the right thing. But God redeems them, and then they turn to God on different occasions. And so that's what we love about Scripture, is just the willingness of God to take us as we are, no matter how flawed we are. And every Jew that lives today can trace their ancestral line back to Jacob. And he is a critical piece of human history. I mean, the course of human history changed because of him. And so he's someone to take notice of and to look at his life and to certainly.
That's part of the Abrahamic promise that was announced to Jacob, that in your seed all the families of the earth will be blessed. Mm. And what Paul ends up arguing in the book of Galatians chapter 3 is that word seed is singular. So it's in one seed in particular, one offspring in particular, through whom the world would be blessed.
The whole world
It's
will
the messianic
be blessed.
seed.
Absolutely.
And so that's ultimately, he's the only one true righteous person. And that's why we need to trust in him. Because we're not.
Excellent. So should I read?
Yes. Start with 22.
Is this the right time?
Yes. Genesis 32,
right.
Start at verse 22.
Okay. So the title of the chapter is Jacob Wrestles with God. So starting with 32, and we'll go, starting with 22, and we're going to go through 32. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
So immediately there, you can find that this is a weird story. This is not like something that's going to happen to you on your trip to the grocery store. And that, I think, people should embrace the weirdness of the Bible. It's an ancient book featuring ancient cultures. I don't know if you've had this experience, but when you go to a foreign country, they do weird things. People from other places have different customs. Yeah. And if you go back in time here, it would be weird because they're going to have different customs. Well, when you read the Bible, it's an ancient people in a faraway time and place, and so a lot of their laws and customs and like, what's the deal with the avoiding of eating the sinew of the thigh? It's strange. Well, just embrace the weirdness. This is an ancient people from somewhere there in the Mesopotamian area, the Levant, and Jacob is returning to the Promised Land, and he has this encounter with, some say it's an angel. In fact, I mentioned Bono of U2. He has a song in which he says Jacob wrestled the angel, And the reason why some people say Jacob wrestled an angel, you'll have hymns and songs that allude to that, is that Hosea, when he tells this story, I think it's chapter 12, he mentions that it was an angel. And that makes sense in light of other promises, other sections of the Bible in which you have God being described as an angel, because there is in some way, in some cases, like at the burning bush, there was, it says it's Yahweh who was speaking to Moses there, but the very first part says it was the angel of Yahweh. So it's a messenger, probably better to translate it as an ambassador, the ambassador of Yahweh, who also happens to be Yahweh. And there are some ancient texts, when you look at, like, say, the Aramaic translations of the Old Testament, it mentions the Yahweh who was there standing on the rock that Moses hit, and it says the Word stood there on the rock. Okay, that's the same language that John uses. In the beginning was the Word, who was with God and who was God. It's not a Greek way of describing, like an apologetic for Greeks. It's actually a very Jewish way of talking about kind of the strange nature of God that's there in the New Testament and the Old. And so this scene, we definitely get this this feeling that Jacob has this encounter with God, because he says, "You have seen God and lived," and there's this, he names it, the Peniel, the place where he's been with God. And yet other texts refer to it as an angel. So I think the best way of thinking of this is it's the divine angel, the angel of God's presence, the second person of the Trinity.
And, we all, as Christians, believe that was wrestling with Jesus. And this, I hope I don't throw you a loop by asking you this question, but why the name change? Maybe are you going to get to that, or is that something that is just kind of something that happened? But it just seems very significant that the angel is in the details, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what's the significance of that?
I see what you did there. The angel, not the devil in the details.
Wasn't that clever?
That was
that's
very
why
clever.
They pay me the big
I was trying to
bucks on
figure
the
out why
internet,
did she
right?
Oh, yeah, it makes sense.
The angel's in the details.
So
that's right.
The fact is, this is the very first time that the word or the name Israel appears in the Bible. And so this is because Jacob is Israel, the people of Israel are those who descend from Jacob. And from this point on, he has 12 sons. Those become the 12 tribes. And then the 12 tribes become, they're fruitful and they're multiplying, and they become this numerous people in the land of Egypt. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Yes, very significant. A lot of people, I don't think they understand the significance of this scene. If this is the first place where we get the name Israel, and God is the one in this incarnation, he's in human form, if he's the one who's there sort of attacking Jacob and wrestling with him and gives him this name Israel, it's got to be significant. Unfortunately, too many times, I think the text doesn't have a significance. Basically, one of the standard interpretations is that Jacob wrestled with God and he wouldn't let God go until God gave him his blessing. And that, though it's a popular interpretation, I just think it's completely wrong.
Really? Because
yes.
that's... I was nodding my head like, oh, yeah, that's totally it.
That's where most commentators across the centuries are, great exegetes have presented that view. And
because he gets renamed, and then the new name means what? Do you know what the new name means?
Israel. Well, we'll get into that, but I'll hold on that for a second, because the standard interpretation is that it means you have wrestled with God. Israel. El is the God part. Isra. Some people say it means wrestles with God, and then people like Jordan Peterson has a new book recently came out called "We Who Wrestle with God." And he's kind of alluding to that. Dennis Prager, radio commentator, Jewish thinker, he wrote a commentary on Genesis where he says, it's almost impossible to overstate the importance of the meaning of the name Israel, because it means struggle with God. And it's a very important text. But then he says, basically the text is telling us that we too should struggle with God, and then the text is sort of spiritualized to mean we need to struggle, even doubt, even struggle in our prayers. So it's not actually wrestling with God himself physically, but it's sort of the way we are to respond to God, maybe struggle in an intellectual sense. And that to me is, since it's such a monumentally important text, I would just ask, if you have that view or if you've heard of that view, just let's follow the narrative and let Scripture interpret Scripture and see if the text isn't perhaps saying something else.
Okay, that's why you're here, Shane. I can't wait to hear what you're going to say. Because honestly, that's been my interpretation, and I've probably just heard it from other people, and I assume everyone else knows, they're the scholars, so I should just take it at face value as what they say. But
that's right.
Now we have Shane.
Well, this is why I just encourage a healthy skepticism, because for every Bible passage, there may be 4, 5, 20 different interpretations, and they can't all be right. And so sometimes you should ask, is this the only way to read the passage? How have other people read the passage? And then that's why reading widely is a healthy thing. And even if you don't end up adopting this other perspective, you may have a better appreciation for why your neighbor believes differently than you do.
And honestly, you've come at such a timely point in my God journey, because I'm kind of at a point in my life where I have more time to do some of this digging. So you're very helpful for me because there are scripture like this or other scripture that I've read for years where I'm kind of like, well, they all say that, so I guess that's what it is.
Yeah.
But now I'm learning over the years that my skepticism 30 years ago was actually not totally off base of, why is it like that? Right.
Yeah.
And now I'm learning maybe it wasn't exactly like that.
Well, the first question or the first challenge would be, like, is that grasping theme in the book of Genesis a good theme or a negative thing? And that's why I think letting Scripture interpret Scripture, there are clues in the text, in the earlier parts of the text, that help you understand what's happening in this part of the text. And we'll look at some of those. In one of the key passages that helps us to understand this text is Genesis 27, which is the scene in which some of your readers, if they're familiar with Genesis, will remember that Jacob wears Esau's clothing to deceive his father, Isaac. Isaac is sort of blind. It's his mother's idea, Rachel's idea. He puts on Isaac's clothes and skins of a goat to deceive the father, to steal the birthright. Isaac is blessing his son, and he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am Esau, your firstborn son." You have the sound of Jacob, but you have the skin of Esau. So that particular scene helps to explain why Jacob and the Israelites get the promised land of Israel, the fruitful blessing, the fruitful land that's abundant. The land of Edom, which was sort of the place that Esau ended up getting, was what he got because of the deception, which is odd. It's an odd way to tell the story if you're making up, like, here's the honorific tale we're going to tell of our patriarch. He actually got this land by deceiving his brother. I mean, who would make up the story that way? It doesn't make any sense.
Right, except that didn't Edom, wasn't Esau wanting to live in Edom? Didn't he? Am I getting that right?
There is a scene in chapter 33 where he seems to be okay with that area.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, in chapter 27, he's frustrated that Isaac, because he comes in later, he's frustrated that his father blessed Jacob in his place. And then he said, "Can it be undone?" And it's like, "Nope, it's already been done." So he gets second best, and if that area of Eden is dry and arid and unfruitful, and it's ended up being Edom and Nabatea, it's the place in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the third movie, it's Petra, the arid desert sand, it's sand.
Yeah.
So
you just made me flash. I this could be irrelevant, but I just, you know, that whole culture, that's like totally messed up. That that the firstborn gets the goods and the secondborn is like the second best. And, that is just a recipe for dysfunctional families. And if anyone has ever been raised in a dysfunctional family where one child is favored over another, it never ends well. It just never ends well. So it took them a lot of generations to figure that out, and certainly the birth and death and resurrection of our Savior kind of nixed all of that. But my goodness, couldn't they figure out that this just was not a good thing? But I digressed. I'm so sorry.
Well, it's an important point, because over and over again you have sort of an undermining of cultural expectations and practices, so that though it was true that the firstborn was typically the one that was blessed, again and again that's sort of undermined, because it's like God's plan trumps the standard cultural practice in so many different cases.
That is beautifully said. I didn't even think of it that way, that even their culture was determining that God didn't intend that. So,
yeah, like Joseph, the story of Joseph, he winds up at the right hand of power in Egypt, and with a great redemption. And yet, when he had sort of these dreams earlier on as this young kid, because he's like the youngest of the 12, second youngest, his older brothers were like, "What are you talking about? That we're going to bow down to you? What?" And that's why they hated him, because it went completely against the normal expectations. It's the firstborn and the older kids who get the respect.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point to put out. And mom, dads, if you're out there, please don't do that. Please don't favor one over the other. It just really will not go well for you. So just figure out, even if you like one more than the other, don't let the second one know that, please. So anyway, and that's not of God. That is not of God. All right, so keep going, Shane.
All right,
I'm loving it.
Because of Genesis 27, he gets he receives the promise from Isaac. That's when the mother tells tells Esau, she tells Jacob that Esau wants to kill you, and he leaves the land. As he's leaving the land, he encounters the scene at Bethel where it's the Jacob's ladder scene. Angels ascending and descending. So he encounters angels there as he's leaving the land, and he receives that promise that God will be with him. Now that he's coming back, right there at the very beginning of Genesis 32, we're told that he sees an encampment of angels. And again, this is one of those weird things in the Bible. What does this mean? Well, when he sees the encampment of angels, he says, "Wow, this is God's camp." Basically, what happens is this is sort of a redo of Eden. Eden is God's first camp, and Adam and Eve sin. And guess what? They're kicked out of Eden. They're kicked out of God's camp. What happens? How does God prevent them from re-entering?
He puts the angels. He blocks it with the angels
cherubim
at the gate.
and the flashing sword, right? So Jacob has sinned. He's been effectively exiled from the promised land, but now he's coming back, and he's allowed to walk past the angels. Why? When you compare it to this previous scene earlier in Genesis, it doesn't make any sense, because Jacob he's just as sinful. He's cheated, and why is he coming back? And why aren't the angels stopping him? Why is he allowed to come back to the promised land? Well, the answer is because he was told, he was invited back by God, by God's grace. Not his merit. In fact, that same kind of language comes up again in the book of Exodus. God says to the people, "Do not say in your hearts that you are entering this land because you are because of your righteousness. No, you are a stiff-necked people." It's not that group of people. It's all of us. I mean, that's what Isaiah says. All we like sheep have gone astray, in each to our own way. So it's not Jacob's righteousness. He's invited here to walk into God's camp, past the flashing sword, with the cherubim with the flashing sword, at God's invitation. And God has a particular plan for him, and that's why he's being invited back. And it's just grace.
Wow. I never connected those dots, Shane. And that's what you do. And that is what's so impressive about you. And I just never would have thought of that. And the cherubim at Eden, and then the angels camped out, opening the door for him to enter the promised land. That's
And he sees them when he's leaving the land, and he sees them when he's coming back, and that's significant. And that's where, if you pay attention to a lot of sometimes it's hard to see because the verbs are the same. Some of the language you find in Genesis, Adam was called to work and to serve. Those are the same verbs you find in the priestly activity. They are working and serving there at the temple or at the tabernacle, and so Adam is kind of, when you look at it in Hebrew, he definitely has kind of like this priestly calling. He's supposed to tend that area, and he should have kicked that serpent out who was lying, and he failed, which is what Israel fails to do as well. So there are a lot of temple themes. Oh, and when Israel fails, guess what happens? They get kicked out of the land. They're exiled off to Babylon. So that idea of exile and then being brought back by grace is just a very important theme throughout the entire Bible.
That's amazing. And, I think of Jacob and how in so many ways he was so smart. Isn't this just the human nature? The guy, I mean, isn't it when he got to Laban, his uncle, and he met his wife, Rachel, his future wife, Rachel, that he started crossbreeding animals, and he made his uncle a very rich man. He was just this smart business guy that was able to so you have this kind of brilliance on one side, and then you have this other, so it just kind of shows the dichotomy in each of us, right? He had these tremendous gifts and talents that really were passed down to many of his offspring, Joseph, who ended up doing the same thing that his dad had done for the uncle. He did that for the Pharaoh, made the Pharaoh first he started with Potiphar.
Yep.
Then he moved on to the Pharaoh and made the Pharaoh very rich and took care of all the finances. All of the finance of the entire kingdom was Joseph's responsibility. And he inherited those gifts, those unique gifts from his father. And Joseph, thank goodness, we are not always what our parents are, right? He was able to change his life and turn it around and forgive the sin that the great sin that had been done to him, which was selling him into slavery. And so anyway, I'm sorry, I digressed. Keep going, Shane. You're doing great. It's just this kind of stuff is just so rich.
Well, in verse 3, right after he sees the encampment of angels, in chapter 32, you begin to find all these. You begin to see Jacob telling his servants to give all these gifts to his brother. Now that he's back in the land, he's afraid of his brother, so he's going to start sending gifts to Esau. And he says, "I have sent to tell my Lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." He's sending these gifts to my Lord in order that I might find favor in your sight. And when he finds out that Esau is coming with 400 men, he's even more afraid and sends hundreds of goats and rams and cows, hoping to appease him. Now, that word in Hebrew, appease, it's Kippur. Have you ever heard of Yom Kippur?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Kippur. So he's attempting to appease, to assuage his anger with these gifts, these animals. And then he says, so that I will be accepted. Wow. He calls him my Lord. He's trying to find favor. He's appeasing with animals. These are all these key verbs that come up in Moses' later book. It's foreshadowing. Yeah. Moses is sort of teasing out. But the weird thing is, these are verbs that related to what happens at the tabernacle, later the temple, the sacrificial system, with language of atonement, acceptance, appeasement, favor. And yet here it's sort of misplaced. He's coming back into the land, not really thinking about God. He's afraid of his brother. It's the fear of the Lord that's the beginning of wisdom. And Esau, Jacob is coming back and he's afraid of Esau. He's afraid of another man, his brother. And that's, I think, at the heart of what's happening in this text. And so what he does next in verse 11, he prays that he could be delivered from Esau, for I fear him that he may come and attack me, the mothers with their children. Okay, so what is on his mind as he's coming back? He's afraid of being attacked. What happens in the text? He's attacked. All right, keep that in mind. Verse 22, that night he took his 2 wives and his 2 servants and his 11 children across the ford, and he's going to protect them. He's going to remain alone on the other side because he doesn't, if he's going to be attacked by Esau, he doesn't want his wives and children to be there. And so he places them on one side and he's on the other. What was he fearing again?
Attack.
By who?
Esau.
He's thinking he's going to be attacked by Esau. So when he's attacked in the middle of the night, what's going to go through his mind? He gets attacked in the dark. In verse 24, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. If it's dark and he can't see him very well, who do you think he thinks it is?
So he thinks it's Esau at first.
He thinks it's Esau. And so he's actually not wrestling with God to get his blessing. He's wrestling what he thinks is Esau. And if you're wrestling with Esau, that makes sense in light of what he's been doing his whole life.
Right.
He was wrestling with Esau in his womb. He's been a wrestler. He's been trying to grab. It's that grabbing, grasping theme that's actually a negative idea. And he's thinking. When I started thinking along these lines with various hints from some writers, I tried to find, I went through commentary after commentary looking for others who've caught this. Very few have this, but I found a couple. And one of them is John Lennox, the mathematician. It's like, how could some of the great Reformation commentators miss this? But John Lennox, the mathematician, gets it, right? So here's what John Lennox says. Jacob probably thought at first that it was his brother Esau who had been failed to be mollified by the gifts that had now come to fight him. His future will be decided by hand-to-hand combat in the night. Yet as the wrestling progressed, it slowly dawned on Jacob that there was something very strange about the encounter. No, this strange opponent was not Esau. It was someone different altogether. So that's, I think, if you have that perspective, I think it makes more sense of the text. He actually thinks his brother Esau has attacked him, and that's the key insight. And if you take that perspective and you begin to slowly pay attention to Jacob's questions and his realization, I think the text makes more sense.
Interesting. I hadn't looked at it that way, Shane. So in your view, it's very possible in the real life struggle that he thought that it was Esau in the middle of the night.
I think that's what the text is leading us to. If you go back and you kind of pay attention to what is happening in the very first section of Genesis 32, he's obsessed with his brother. He's afraid he's going to be attacked by his brother. So you don't have to sort of guess what's going on in his mind. The text tells us what's going on in his mind. And he thinks he's going to be attacked by his brother because Esau is coming with 400 men. So that's why I'm going to separate my family over here. And that's when if he's attacked, nothing in the text has led us to conclude that he would think God attacked him. That actually doesn't make any sense.
So at what point are you thinking he realized it wasn't his brother?
There's a line in the text that helps us here. I think it's verse 25. In that verse, the readers are informed that when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket. There, the readers aren't even told that it's God. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint. So we know that something supernatural is going on. We don't know. Is this an angel? Is it a demon? Is it God? We don't know. But it's just a man who now we know has supernatural powers. What does Jacob know? What's going to go through his mind? I think later in the text, Jacob asks a question that I think reveals he doesn't know yet who his wrestling partner is, but he's probably confused. And since he's wrestling in the dark, the question is, what did Jacob experience there? The readers are informed that this man touched him and that's what happened. But maybe Jacob just thinks his hip went out. We don't know what Jacob thought at that moment, but certainly we shouldn't immediately conclude that, now Jacob knows it's because he had the power to put out his hip, that it's definitely the God of the universe he's wrestling with. That would be, I think, a leap, and I don't think the text warrants it. it gets even more interesting. And this is an interpretation that I encourage you to be skeptical about. But just see if it makes sense as you wrestle with the text. In verse 26,
I'll only wrestle with it if it'll bless me. How's that?
All right. Verse 26.
I'm kidding.
I know you are. In verse 26, the unidentified man says, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." All right. So is Jacob now refusing to let God go until he receives his blessing? Does he have enough information to conclude that it's God? Because as we'll see, I think he's still confused by verse 29. This is verse 26. And if Jacob actually thinks he's still fighting Esau, then he's continuing to do what he's been doing. In fact, in the ancient world, often conflicts over various disputes were often settled by wrestling matches. So you could actually have a judge say, "Okay, well, you two duke it out, and whoever wins this wrestling match will get the property." That could be what is going on here. That Jacob thinks his brother has attacked him, and he's going to wrestle the blessing from him once for all. "I won't let you go until you bless me." He got the blessing from his father. Okay. Now, but that again is still the message is human striving. Now, verse 27. The man asks Jacob, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. Recall what happened the last time Jacob was asked his name. He lied. He said Esau. Here, what if it's God who is coming? Jacob was dressed like Esau in the last scene. Here, God is coming dressed as Esau, asking Jacob to come clean. So he's kind of giving him, in my hypothesis here, he's kind of giving him a taste of his own medicine. I'm going to become an incarnation of your worst nightmare. You deceived your brother, and I'm going to deceive you for a little bit in the dark. I'm going to make you think that you're wrestling your brother who's come to attack you. But instead of, it's not a deception for malevolent purposes. It's actually the most amazing hint of things to come. What happens is, in that Genesis 27 moment, he said, "I am Esau." And that was the scene in which, Jacob really deceived his brother, but got the blessing of the land. In here, he says, "I am Jacob." And then he's told by God, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." And Jacob responds in the next verse by asking the man to tell him his name. Basically, wait a minute, who are you? So that's verse 29 where Jacob asks the man's name. Now, if he knew that it was God, why does he ask him his name? To me, it's here it's there is this person has authority over him and speaking in this clear way, and now maybe he's putting two and two together, and that's why he asks, "Who are you?" And then he says, "Why is it that you ask my name?" But there he blesses him. And then the narrator of the text, Moses, tells us, Jacob called the name of the place Peniel for, quote, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." Something clicks. Maybe he's showing more as the dawn is breaking. He sees this is a supernatural visitor, and more information's given. But the question would be, does Jacob really get the blessing by his striving? Is Jacob stronger than God? Because it's God, after all, who's the one who had the wrestling match, right?
Right.
Is Jacob stronger than God?
No.
No, he's not stronger than God. It's sort of like, when the father wrestles with a child but lets the child win, and then he says, "Look at this, hooray!" That's what God is doing here. And when you look at what Jacob says, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered," then you know that once Jacob realizes that his wrestling partner was God, he didn't get blessed because of his own striving. He got blessed by God's deliverance. Because if you're going to tangle with God, typically you're going to turn to ash or something.
Right.
You can't actually wrestle God. So at the end of the day, this is a passage that's not really about grabbing and getting your blessing. It's a story of God's weakness, not Jacob's strength. Now, is that
God's weakness?
Yeah. Is that a theme you've ever heard in the Bible? The weakness of God?
No. So how are you correlating that? I mean, God is not weak, obviously. God can only appear to be weak for a purpose of his design, but God is not weak. So you have to explain that a little better, Shane.
So there is a line in Paul's writings where he talks about the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. And it's because we preach a foolish message about a weak Messiah who was crucified. What does it take for God to become a human being and to allow himself to be crucified? It's not his strength. It's his willingness to enter and to be the suffering person on our behalf. So we're saved not by God, in the way you would expect. It's the Cecil B. DeMille, Charlton Heston, part the Red Sea, all the strength, the triumph. It's ultimately the ultimate exodus. We're saved by God's weakness. Now, here's the way I think this will click for you, and that's
I need a click here because I'm still not getting the weakness as much as you are. So
there's a guy named Augustine. Have you heard of Augustine before?
Of course.
So Augustine, a great church father, 300s, he says, as Jacob wrestled, he prevailed against the angel. Here he calls him the angel. Again, it's not a bad idea because Hosea calls him an angel. Some high meaning is here. And when the man had prevailed against the angel, he kept hold of him, and he kept hold of him whom he had conquered, saying, I will not let you go until you bless me. When the conqueror was blessed by the conquered, Christ was prefigured. Such great power had the conquered one that a single touch of Jacob's thigh made him lame. It was then by his own will that he was conquered, for he had the power to lay down his strength and the power to take it up again. That's a quote from John 10. He was not angry at being conquered, just as he was not angry at being crucified. That's Augustine's take as he's interpreting this passage.
You just made me flash on. For years, I always struggled with the verse or the Sermon on the Mount, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I always struggled with that. I was like, how about what, God? You're asking us to be weak, But evidently it took me, again, you pray about things and sometimes it takes a few years, but then you get the answer. That the translation for that word meek is not weak. The translation for that word is strength under control. So in other words, I have the power to make you dust, but the term used for it is evidently the term used for a war horse, a horse that is so strong and so well trained that it could kill you, the horse itself. But because it is constrained from its power, it is under control. And so that's kind of, I'm thinking that's maybe a similar analogy to what you're saying, is that not God not having the power, but God controlling the power for his purpose.
Right. Yeah. So God, he allowed himself, just like the father allows a small child to conquer him in a wrestling match, just for, not that he is weak by nature, but he's weak for a purpose in that event. In the same way, God would by strict power, he could totally overpower Jacob, but he allows himself to be conquered, Augustine says, to foreshadow his ultimate aim. Now, how does Jacob come back into the land? He first he walks past the angels, but then he encounters God. He's fearing his brother, but God is his ultimate problem.
Yeah.
And And so God has a wrestling match. But, hey, looks like you beat me. Wow. When he realizes it's God, though, he says he's been delivered. He didn't say, wow, I'm a strong guy. He says, I've been delivered.
Yes.
And this is where the name Israel is actually quite interesting. The word Isra, so the L is the God part. Isra, the key thing is when I looked at that, when I searched for the Hebrew, there are only two places where it could possibly mean to struggle. And that's the Genesis 32 passage and the Hosea passage. Everywhere else, this particular verb construction just means power, authority, prince, ruler, might. So it's not you have struggled with God. It's you have overpowered God. You have power over God. You have might with God, strength. So let me just read you a few of the ancient interpretations of this passage. John chapter 11. Okay. So Israel basically means, here's the Greek translation from the Hebrew. Israel will be your name, for you have prevailed with God. An Aramaic translation. You are great before God. The Latin Vulgate. Your name will be Israel, for you have been strong over God. So those are, I think that idea that Israel will have power over God, and again, not because of his strength or the nation's strength, because Israel is personifying the nation in the future, because that's how the people in the future will also enter the land, not by their own strength, but by God's weakness, ultimately the cross. It's the ultimate expression of God's weakness that God allowed himself to be conquered, God allowed him to be crucified, so that's the ultimate expression of how we enter into the promised land. As Jacob comes back, this is a foreshadowing, Augustine says, of the cross.
Shane, that is like amazing. I just never put those pieces together. And you are just truly a guy who you just have to keep coming back and just blowing these scriptures into high definition television for me, because never would have put that together. And thank you. Thank you for bringing that truth to us today. I don't pretend to understand all of these things, but just tying, and what you've said in previous episodes is just every chapter, every verse has everything to do with God's Messiah. And he explained that on the road to Emmaus. Oh, just to have been, someone in the pocket of one of those guys walking and hearing that conversation, must have been amazing. But Shane, you have to come back because there is just too much to unpack. But Shane, to your credit, you'll spend time and really go into those areas that others just either don't want to or don't have the time to or aren't interested to. But once you do, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just, you can't get to the bottom of it because it's infinite, isn't it? It's just infinite.
Yeah. And it's not just a hint of things to come in redemptive history. It's actually Jesus there in person doing the hinting.
Whoa. Yes. Oh my gosh. And that's the greatest way to tie that all together. It's that it wasn't just the words itself. It was the Messiah in the flesh that was doing the wrestling.
Yeah.
And let the child win.
Yep.
And we're going to end it with that here today. Shane, I cannot thank you enough. You are truly a scholar. I just feel so blessed to have you explain to me a scene in the Bible that, quite frankly, over the years, I kind of gloss over and I kind of skip over because I just never really understood it. And for you to give it this new depth and meaning and to bring Jesus into it in that perspective of ultimately the cross and his ultimate sacrifice is just really amazing. And I can't wait till you come back and reveal some of these other new truths to us. And people, if you're out there and you heard what Shane had to say today, I want you to know that what you hear Here is the truth. And you can
handle
the truth.
the truth.